upcoming weekend. We have a great event here lined up to talk a little politics, great weather, which I'm taking all the credit for this weekend. But we warmly welcome you to campus and a chance to see your children or return as alums to get a better sense of today's Hobart William Smith. So we're happy to include a President's Forum series here to talk a little politics. This is a speaker series I started from our first year here, and bringing interesting guests to campus to talk with students, frequently teach a class, deliver a talk and questions. And on Monday, we'll welcome Bill Galston to campus from the Brookings Institution, who is leading intellectual force behind NoLabels.org, and a very interesting thinker. The series started many years ago when I first came to Hobart William Smith, and I called my former colleague and friend George Stephanopoulos, and I said, "George, do you believe in free speech?" He said, "Yeah, I do." I said, "Good, you're going to give one at Hobart." Madeline Albright fell for that. So there's been a litany of folks who support the Constitution and make it a little bit easier for us here. So today's President Forum, where we welcome friends of the colleges. James Carville is a parent of a student and our presidential fellow for civic engagement, the dynamic young mayor of Ithaca, New York, Monty Myrick, and members of our faculty as well. So there's a lot to talk about in politics, a lot of fun activities here. We urge you to silence your cell phones or throw them out the window, whatever you want to do, so that we can take advantage of the opportunity here. We're thrilled to have Talk of the Nation's Neil Conan and political junkie Ken Bruton, and then I go back to the Dukakis campaign when he was with ABC News. But these are two folks who've created this very popular show on NPR and now bring it to stage shows where they really combine polls and trivia and questions and fun and opportunities for engagement. So we don't want to take any more time away from conversation and engagement here, for the conversation is all about politics this year. Join me in welcoming Neil Conan and Ken Bruton here at Hobart.
Good morning, and at least the president was kind enough not to remember that Ken said, you know, maybe candidate Dukakis would look good in a tank. But it's amazing to be here on such a beautiful day, on such a beautiful campus. I've not been to Geneva, New York before. I've been to Geneva, Switzerland, but not just Geneva, New York before, though my family's from this part of the country, from Syracuse and Pompey, New York, which, as I recall, is the highest occupied territory in the state of New York. But we're here on the eve of critical elections. We're looking ahead to 2016, and we're here as the country engages in a new war in the Middle East. So all of these things are worth discussing. We're also going to be discussing the engagement or not of the youth vote. So Ken, as you look ahead to 2016, what do you look for?
Well, I'm looking forward to see what the reaction is from the Democratic community, the Democratic progressive community, to Hillary Clinton and the war. I mean, one of the reasons Barack Obama got the nomination, in my view, in 2008, rather than Hillary Clinton, was the fact that she, among many Democrats, John Edwards, Joe Biden, Chris Dodd, voted to give the president the authorization to go to war in Iraq in 2002. And that hurt her on the stump in 2007 and 2008, whereas Barack Obama, who was not in the Senate, of course, talked about, well, I opposed it from the beginning, and it was the wrong war at the wrong time. To see Hillary Clinton, I mean, of course, there's so much to talk about before 2016, because 2014 we're on the precipice of an amazingly
on the edge of a cliff, too.
I don't read my clip notes. The battle for control of the Senate. It is, I mean, the fact is that this could be determined by the state of Kansas, which, as you well remember, the last time Kansas defeated a Republican senator was never. It's never happened, ever. And that could happen this year. It's a remarkable year. But going back to Hillary Clinton, talking about that famous interview in the Atlantic magazine, talking about maybe we need a more muscular foreign policy, a more aggressive foreign policy. And this is not the party of Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders and who knows what. So that, we always talk about the Tea Party versus the establishment on the Republican side. Let's see if there's any kind of conflict like that on the Democratic side. Now, as a journalist, I probably like conflict. I'm not trying to foment a civil war, but it's interesting to know where the parties come from, what they've learned over the past post-Iraq, post-Vietnam era, and we'll just see if it plays out in 2016.
More on all of that later, but let's introduce our first guest this afternoon. Still this morning. And they are Iva Deutsch, professor of political science teaching. She was teaching a class on midterms earlier today, so she should know something about that. And Dwayne Lucas, associate professor of political science and associate dean of faculty, both here at Hobart and William Smith. Can you welcome up to the stage?
Boy, girl, boy, girl.
Ivan, you were teaching a course of the midterms this morning. What are you expecting? What surprises are you looking for?
I'm not looking for any surprises. What I was stressing in the class was the fact that, everybody's so interested in the election and it's so important. And in answer to the question, what difference does it make? None. In other words, nothing's going to change as a result.
Don't you think, though, if the Republicans win control of the Senate, it's going to be gridlock in Washington?
I hadn't thought of that.
Some people
Why
say...
are you insightful?
7 years of high school.
The president, however, might want to get a judicial nomination or two through.
The president has tried to get all sorts of nominations through and has the same success rate that my Yankees do getting into the World Series.
There is also the question of an attorney general and the timing of a nomination. The president and his party might well like to have that all decided in the lame duck session.
Well, you would think that the Republicans would realize all of this. And I would say maybe the fact that they do, in other words, they have been in an excellent position to block things. They're going to be in an excellent position to block things. What changes? What's the difference?
Well, one of the things that Majority Speaker, Leader Baker said is that he wants to put in all kinds of reversing the president's executive orders on political EPA into must-pass bills like the budget. And then if the government shuts down, it's the president's veto that's shutting them down, not the Republican.
Okay. I'm not sure that that's going to be a good enough selling point if that's what he's thinking. That, he's just going to claim it's a totally functional government, big bad president. It's not going to sell.
It's interesting what didn't sell also. When you thought of the way this campaign cycle began, one, we saw the ill-advised, in my view, the Republicans shut down the government last October when the Republican numbers were in single digits. And then following that, the ill-fated rollout of the Affordable Care Act with the botched the website and all that, and then the Democrats going to pay for that. Nobody is talking about either of those scenarios anymore. That's from the distant past.
No, you're 100% right. And I don't know that they're going to come back as major issues. I don't think so.
Not in 5 weeks to go, no.
Dwayne Lucas, let me ask you, is there any way that this election is going to lead to a less partisan Congress?
No, if I can guarantee you anything about politics, no, it's not. And part of that is sort of the nature of our political system today that I like to, or my research says, and what I see in politics is that we don't talk across aisles anymore. We're more likely to talk to Republicans if we're Republicans, more likely to talk to Democrats if we're Democrats. But the two sides aren't listening to one another, nor are they talking to one another. Unlike the good old days in the 1730s.
That was pre-cable.
And we're down to the point where, in fact, if you're talking about the possibilities, even the possibility of the House changing hands, how many actual competitive districts are there?
There's not a lot. I mean, we're looking at, in the 2014 race, something like 190 safe Republican seats, 160, maybe 150 safe Democratic seats. The other 80 or so are in contention, but we think most of them are going to go the same way, at least in the House, most of them are going to go the same way they've always gone.
But you talk about the desire for the parties to talk to each other. When so-called establishment Republicans were talking to the other side, the Tea Party came up and said that they're rhinos. And you know, rhino is short for rhinoceros. No, Republican in name only. And so basically, when you had people like Mitch McConnell and Lindsey Graham and Thad Cochran and Lamar Alexander, when they sort of, with, like Dick Lugard in 2012 in Indiana, when they would be cozy with Democrats, the right wing would put up a opponent. That's what happened in Virginia with Eric Cantor. He was not thought to be conservative enough. And David Bratt, he was the guy who beat the majority leader in the Cantor. When I saw the headline, Bratt upsets Cantor, I thought it was a story about a precocious bar mitzvah boy.
But as you look ahead, one thing that has changed in recent election years is the experiment in California, where they're doing not two separate primaries, Republican and Democratic primary, but a group primary. Whoever emerged, the top two, whoever emerged from that primary, run against each other in heavily Democratic districts. Two Democrats in heavily Republican districts, two Republicans. The theory is that it would lead to a more moderate victor, as the more moderate of the two would attract support as independents and
Right. The idea is that if we're not going to talk across party lines one-on-one individually, and we're going to create congressional districts that are one party, lean one party, lean the other party, let's sort of take away the districting that we do, get away from this gerrymandered approach to it, and let's let the constituents, let's let the voters decide on their own. And the idea is that instead of the strings are too small alone, so let's force them into the center.
But the problem with redistricting is that the people who decided are the state legislatures,
Yes.
and they have their own interest at heart.
And they have their party interests in that party. And they're going to look to protect their incumbents, they're going to look to protect their interests, and they're not necessarily going to look to protect the interests of the other party. And that other party sort of loses ground. So part of the problem, or part of the challenge, why I see very little change in 2014 is because in 2010, when we redistricted a lot of seats to favor one party over the other.
And I wonder, are we developing not two small d Democratic parties, are we developing majoritarian parties, where if you win, you feel you've won everything and screw the other side, and they don't get anything?
I think we have, but I think developing is the interesting word there, because I think it's sort of been the mentality for a while in our system that we have a winner-take-all approach to elections, and that says to the person that emerges out of a congressional district, hey, you're our guy, or you're our girl, go represent us. And when they go out and represent, they are doing what they see as the best thing. Usually, and we like to think in terms of they do the best thing for that entire district, but in most cases, they're doing the best thing for their next election, for their what we call their re-election.
And once upon a time, when the way they used to draw districts, it would be like 54-46, one party or the other, so you had to talk to the other party. Where now, if districts are 70-30, then you see it back-to-back, Democratic, Republican right next to each other, because they, like with North Carolina, they'll put all the African Americans in one district and then take all the blacks out of the adjoining districts to elect Republicans. So the Republican incumbents will talk to their majority Republican incumbents, Democrats will talk to the Democratic majority, and nothing gets done.
And we also see, though, the goal of majority-minority district was to sort of create opportunities for minority representatives to get in Congress. What we're finding is that also has had, the way it's been implemented, the effect of diluting the minority influence in any particular district, or other than the one.
With the idea that they could maybe one day even be elected president?
Yes.
Ivan Deutschman, before we let you go, one seat in the Senate that's up this year that we're going to be surprised to come November 5th?
Well, this morning, they said Kate Hayden was now looking to win, so, but that was this morning.
That's North Carolina. That's a little North Carolina.
An endangered Democrat in North Carolina. So you think she's looking better than...
Yes, better, what is it, better than expected? Yes.
Okay. Thank you both very much for being with us. We'll remember that one of the regular features of the political junkie segment on Talk of the Nation was trivia questions. And Ken, I think, has tailored some for New York. And you have any? No. Moving right along.
I do. I have trivia questions, and A.D. Craig, our amazing producer, we have Talk of the Nation official winner buttons. Don't pull out the answer. These are all New York related, about 4 or 5 of them. Some of them are easier than not, but some of them are tough. You have to know New York political history, and if you get them, you win a button. So we're going gangbusters on the internet. Okay, so here's some easy ones in my view, but you have to know your politics. Who was the first New York governor? Don't yell out the answer, raise your hand. Who was the first New York governor elected president? In the back.
Roosevelt.
No, Roosevelt is not. He was elected president, but he was not the first. In the back there. I'm sorry? George Clinton was never president.
Good with the funky
That other Clinton. Ask Mark Geary. Woman in the back.
Millard Fillmore.
Millard Fillmore was not governor of New York. Sir. McKinley was from Ohio. Van Buren was not governor of New York. Anybody else? Woman in the back. Teddy Roosevelt was not the first, but he was governor of New York who was elected president. Taft was from Ohio. Actually, I don't want to make weight jokes, but he was from Ohio and Indiana. He was on Wait, Wait, Don't Tell Me. In the back. Grover Cleveland is the correct answer. Okay, now they get tough. Who is the last New Yorker who served as both governor and senator? Pataki was not senator, but he was close. He was mayor of Peekskill. In the back. I'm sorry? Cuomo was not senator. He was secretary of state.
Neither one.
With Cuomo. Yes, sir.
Rockefeller?
Rockefeller was not senator.
Vice president?
Wagner was not governor. Yes. Averell Harriman was never senator. Tom Dewey was never senator. But he had this great decimal system. Yes, in fact. No, Rockefeller was never senator. He was governor 4 terms, but yes.
2016 Hillary Clinton.
No, she wasn't governor. She wasn't governor. Anybody else? Yes, sir. Franklin Roosevelt was not senator. He was state senator, but not United States senator.
Secretary of the Navy.
Understood. In the back? Hugh Carey was never senator. Congressman from Brooklyn.
Al Smith.
Al Smith was not senator. First Catholic president. The answer is Herbert Lehman. Okay. Who was the last New Yorker elected governor in his first run for public office? Yes.
Roosevelt.
No, he was a state senator before that. No, Rockefeller was not the first. But it was his first run for public office, but Rockefeller was not the first. Pataki was mayor of Peekskill. Cuomo was lieutenant governor and secretary of state. The answer is Averell Harriman. First time he ran for office. Okay? Okay, since the end of World War II, which New York governor had the shortest term in office?
Malcolm Wilson.
Malcolm Wilson is the correct answer.
Ding, ding, ding.
He became governor after Nelson Rockefeller resigned in '73, and he served for 1 year. I thought the other guesses was Elliot Spitzer and David Patterson, who was mayor of governor for 2.5 years, but Malcolm Wilson is the right answer. You know, I grew up just south of here, the Bronx. And what I love about New York politics, I always think because you grew up in the Bronx and you know New York politics, you know everything. But I've been wrong on so many times. Like I really thought that what's the guy who resigned from Congress from Brooklyn, who was running for mayor? Anthony Weiner. I really thought he was going to be elected mayor because New Yorkers are so crotchety. Before Kirsten Gillibrand, who was the last upstate senator from New York? Huh? No, Moynihan was from New York City.
Manhattan. Hell's Kitchen.
Clinton was, well, not upstate.
Chappaqua.
Yeah.
No, I wouldn't count that.
Jacob Javits was from Manhattan. He was the, yeah.
I think you're in the right era.
Golisano never was elected senator. Ran for governor.
Here?
Keating was the last one elected, but he was not the last senator from upstate New York. That gives a big hint.
Goodell.
Charlie Goodell. Did you get a second button?
We're gonna have to his son.
Okay, now here's the toughest one. This is really the tough one. Well, this is more of a Rochester thing, but it's a Rochester question. So
It's a Rochester.
that's it. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you. I'd like to bring a couple of other guests up now. One, of course, isn't our guest, but our host. You know him as the president of the Hobart and William Smith Colleges. But Mark Gearin, we're going to ask him to put on his other hat when he used to work as communications director for people like Mike Dukakis and Bill Clinton and Al Gore, I think, were among the people who he served. Would you please come up and join us? And Jim Carville, would you join us, please? And I have to ask you guys, we have just started a war. There's a lot of implications about this, but some of them are political. I don't believe there's ever been a conflict that the United States has entered that has not resulted in a bump in the political appreciation of the President of the United States, who could use one at the moment. That may or may not play out this time, but how do you see, Mark Gearin, this new conflict playing out in terms of the near term and the longer term as we look ahead to 2016?
In terms of midterm elections.
Yeah.
I think it will obviously have an impact on some of the toss-up races. When you look at the House and the Senate races, when I look at the Cook report and other ratings and analysis of it, you realize the challenge the Democrats have because there's so many more seats they're defending.
I think 21 of the 33 up is
Of the 36.
Of the 36.
21 and 15.
And the Republicans there's only 15.
Right.
So, and you look at the seats that are probably lost for the Democrats in South Dakota, and so many of the toss-up races are Democratic seats. So I think it has enormous potential, depending how events is this fluid. It's still 5 weeks. That is a very long time in politics. And anything can happen in that sense. That could augur well for the Democrats in some of these races, depending on congressional action and the president's statement. But time remains, I think, for Democrats to achieve some victories in those.
But you've had the president to spend the better part of 6 years doing everything he can to extricate us from the war, to put Iraq in the past tense. Suddenly he finds himself talking about bombing raids on Iraq all over and Syria. Right.
She's tried to avoid
Its implications for the Democratic base, I think.
Yeah, I was going to ask Jim Carver about that. This could lead to splits within the Democratic Party.
You know, problem, wars are like affairs. They're easy to get into, but hell to get out of. You know, people who say boots on the ground, the problem is get the boots off the ground. Put them on there. I think he'll get a modest bump into the blue, that short term. And, you know, he can point to some things. There are 5 Arab nations that have joined in this, but the European nations have. Now, the point I make is 13 years, October, we started bombing the Middle East. And we've been bombing for 13 years. I told my students at Tulane, I hate to tell you this, but 13 years from now, we're still going to be bombing somebody. Absent a better strategy.
See, Bush got a big bump in '91 because it was a limited action. It was a couple of months, right? It was a long time.
And it was a victory.
And it was considered a victory. But I'm saying, but Obama's already said he's going to pass this on to the next
Right. Yeah, how do we know when we win? We won't know. I mean, how do we just kind of say? It's a little bit different. I mean, you know, we have a lot of international support. It does not involve ground troops. Now, I don't know where it's going to end up. Once you start these things, who the heck knows? Where do you end up? They're very experience has taught us that.
There's no ground troops until there are ground troops.
Right. And somebody says, well, you got to do that if you want to finish this, and you get into a campaign, you get back and forth. I'm not smart enough to predict how long it's going to go.
And one of the things is they're even more expensive than an education at Hobart and William Smith.
Things are going so well here.
No, we got great value for my daughter, really.
Understand that. Are you as, I'm interested to hear, do you think it doesn't matter since no matter what happens, no major legislation is passed, but do you think it doesn't matter?
I'm going to disagree with Prof a little bit. I think it does. I think one of the things that matters is to get a hold of CDL. Because they're talking about this thing called dynamic scoring, which means that they're going to say if we cut taxes, we're actually going to raise revenue. Remember how well that worked out?
I thought that was about the Buffalo Bills.
Yeah, right. No, that's where it could, when they get a hold of CEO, if they have both the House and the Senate, they could repeal math. And if you repeal math, that's a dangerous thing to do. But they want to do that. So I think we ought to keep math in place.
I hear you're in favor of it.
I'm in favor of that.
No, I always thought math was amazing, but I think even people were smarter back then. How did they know to call it the 30 Years' War? How did they know?
Even World War I for that matter.
I want to make a point about something that we're talking about, and that is the number of Democratic incumbents that are up. It's what I call the 6-year echo. So if you have a good year, 6 years from that good year, you're going to be exposed. And remember that the Democrats had a good year in 2008. Now just remember this, who had a monster year in 2010? So who's going to have the vulnerable seats up in 2016?
No question.
Okay, so we may be looking at a situation, it's altogether plausible that the Republicans win the Senate back in 2014 and lose it again in 2016. Because not everything is good. Even when you take the Senate back and pick up a lot of seats, the bad part is 6 years later, you're defending.
Well, let me ask you about that. In 1994, 2 years into Bill Clinton's term, the Republicans won the House and Senate.
Right.
But that basically helped Bill Clinton get reelected in 96 because he ran against this right-wing Congress.
Right.
Could a Republican Senate and a Republican House help the Democrats in 2016?
First of all, the Republican brand, and I think everybody knows this, is really, really bad right now. There's not much that they won't go into. The other thing is because of a lot of reasons that we could go into in depth, the presidential years are much more favorable to Democrats than non-presidential years. So even if the Democrats were to keep the Senate, let's say we got 50-50 and Biden broke it, I don't know that we're any better off. I never want to lose an election. I've never been a guy who say you got to lose one so you win the next one. Just win them all. I don't think but I do think that, I think because of semi-complicated reasons, it is very, very difficult for the Democrats to win the House of Representatives, but it is also very difficult for Republicans to win the presidency.
Mark, go into that a little bit. It was in the 80s during the Reagan presidency that people were saying there's a natural Republican constituency in the Electoral College, a lot.
Right.
And now people are saying it really looks difficult for Republicans to
The math
win
has
the
changed.
presidential
The
election.
math has changed. But I'm struck, I was sitting here listening to James and reflecting on how quickly things can change 5 weeks out, let alone 2 years out. In 1988, as you mentioned, I worked for Michael Dukakis. We left the Atlanta convention. We were 17 points ahead. We were picking out our offices, measuring the drapes. We went on to lose 40 states. Fast forward 4 years, I can remember James pacing around in Little Rock, going into the convention in New York, because Clinton was in third place a month on.
Was Perot, right?
Right. And obviously President Clinton went on to it. So much can change in such a period of time. But that's just accelerated. I think cable, 24/7 coverage, all of the analysis. So the math, I think, has changed very significantly. The red and blue states, there's purple, there's more fluidity to these races. And then, of course, the main factor is what kind of candidate can be something or nothing. And it all depends on the strength of the candidates. And that can vary.
Yeah, I think that that's possible for the Democrats to win. I know in Louisiana, but kind of assume, Nate Silver says we have a 27% chance of winning that by math, but I live there, and the Republican candidate is just not that impressive. I wouldn't say our chances are 60% that we keep it, but they're certainly not 27. To go back, one of the things we were talking about, presidential politics, and this is very important to remember. In modern presidential politics, party dominance is the norm. If you think about it, from 1896 to 1932, we had how many Democratic presidents?
Wilson.
And Wilson. And the only reason we had Wilson is Teddy Roosevelt split the Republican Party. All right?
And because he kept us out of war.
Right.
Until
Yeah, right. From 1932 through 1968, we had how many Republicans?
One, right?
And he basically, the Democrats wanted him to run too.
Yeah.
He's not a Republican claim, but okay. And then from 68 to 92, one term of Carter. And from 92 to 2012, the Democrats actually lost the popular vote one time. I mean, in terms of presidential politics, it doesn't feel that way. You tell Jerry, we're in an era of Democratic dominance. And it's hard to see, absent some fundamental shift, that 2016 should be, if you just look at it from a distance, if you just look at the basics, it should be a Democratic year. My favorite statistic about 2012 is this, in terms of how people have clustered together, Democrats are an urban party. If Romney would have broken even in 3 counties, not one, broken even in Broward, Florida, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and Cuyahoga, Ohio, he would have won the electoral vote.
If he could have,
Now, he came nowhere close. He got
I was gonna say,
got
Derek.
swamped, but that's how much.
He
That's
lost
how much.
every swing state in North Carolina, every swing
Yeah, but that's how much
How close?
the urban vote is Democratic. I mean,
John Kerry, if he'd won 60,000 more votes in Ohio, he would have been president.
right, but this is a guy that got swamped.
Yeah.
About breaking even in 3 counties. He got swamped, and it's just how many people, and that's you multiply. That keeps going out and out. So I think the President Obama carried Pennsylvania like 4.5 points. He won 5 out of 18 congressional districts. I mean, the margins in Philadelphia and Allegheny and some of the suburban counties were just so massive.
Well, tell us your famous definition of Pennsylvania.
Well, what I said is that the original quote was from Paola to Penn Hills. It was Alabama without black people.
Pittsburgh and Philadelphia.
Now it has been distilled into it's Pittsburgh and Philadelphia and Alabama in the middle. But that was the kind of the original quote was one of those things where as it got more simplified, And Romney did quite well in Alabama, but it's just not enough. There's not enough people in that part of Pennsylvania to win a presidential election. Turnout share.
Mark, Karen, the other things that has changed since, certainly during politics, but particularly with the Obama campaign, is the ground rule and the use of data to target specific voters down to apartment buildings and apartments and who's exactly there. This was mastered by the Obama campaign, made a huge difference, both in '08 and then again 4 years later. Are the Democrats going to be able to parlay this advantage this year and into 16?
I think so. I think they've learned all the right lessons, but the change is significant. In my office in the White House, there were 4 TVs in the communications office, right? For the 3...
And a radio, I'm sure.
And a radio. And there was a wet bar in the corner. Because in yesteryear, you'd invite the press in for a drink at the end of the news cycle. When does that exist? I can remember when the Obama team was rolling out the vice presidential nomination, they called those of us who worked on vice presidential campaigns. Fluff got on the phone and he said, we're going to announce it on email to all our supporters. I was sitting in my kitchen next door on a Saturday morning, and it was like I had worked for Millard Film. In terms of the technology and the approach, we would have been talking about, should we roll this out on the Today Show, should we, traditional media. And it's vastly changed in many ways for the better. But I think the Obama team has mastered it. The parties learned the lesson, and the Republicans are taking it. Yeah, it's very sophisticated work.
Yeah, where it helps is North Carolina, Iowa, Colorado. They have a database that exists from 2012. In Louisiana, Arkansas, Georgia, Kentucky, Alaska, it doesn't do any good. But I mean, we have to start from ground zero because there's no existing, or New York State, seat going up. But it only helps what they've built up, the infrastructure only helps in what were swing or contested states in 2012. Now, we're making a massive investment in Louisiana in the kind of program they have. We're able to register 80,000 likely Democratic voters, which I think can help some. But just remember that infrastructure, the HOA presidential campaigns are, it applies to not very many states.
How much has Katrina changed the demographics of Louisiana?
Oh, that's a good question. I think overall, the population is kind of stabilized. It is slightly, New Orleans is slightly less African American and slightly more Hispanic.
It's slightly smaller. It's smaller.
Yes, but it was losing population before. And I think most people would say, and thanks to, by the way, I think Hobart we admitted like 20 trips down there. Thanks to people like here, I think the recovery has gone better than anybody would have anticipated at this point. But it's overall electorate in the state is not fundamentally different than it was in 2004.
Before we let you go, I have to ask about the decisions by both the leadership in Congress and by the White House in the run-up to this, start of this new war. There was a vote in both the House and the Senate to fund training for Syrian rebels outside of Syria. And that was the proxy vote for the authorization of force. Before the first Gulf War, we remember that enormous debate in the House of Representatives, 3 nights and days before a very close vote. Weeks of debate leading up to 2003. And now the debate in the Senate was so perfunctory that Senator Mikulski found time to praise the Baltimore Orioles.
Let me, first of all, this is just me. I am so skeptical of training Syrian rebels. I can't tell you how skeptical I am. Let me tell you where my skepticism comes from. We had 9 years in unlimited resources in every weapon that we ever developed for the Iraqi army. We sent people over there, we trained them, we gave them M16s, Abrams tanks, everything that you can imagine. And they did great until somebody fired the first shot.
But it worked.
And that was 9 years.
But it worked so well in Afghanistan.
Right. I know a lot of people say this is good. A lot of people say, and I guess wouldn't try it. But I'm just, what it takes to put a soldier on the ground, the institutions that you have to have, the coaches, the investment. Mark and I were talking about this morning. But the Iraqi army is I'm skeptical of training other people to fight.
Well, James and I had this conversation with Granola, and I was at 7 theaters. So I wanted him to answer. But make your point about West Point and kind of the...
Okay, look, I was in the Marine Corps. What it took, so the officers went to the Naval Academy. How long it takes to make a West Point? How many people have to be trained, the generations, the traditions, the people that come down from that. And so, you come in and you join the Marine Corps and you get a physical and they check you and they have to feed you, they have to arm you, they have to teach you how to shoot, they have to teach you the chain of command, they have to teach you close order drill, they got to teach you battlefield tactics, they got to teach you, lines of fire, they got to teach you a gazillion things. And they have a gazillion people that came before you to do that. You just don't go turn the switch and say, oh, there's a soldier. This American can tell you this. We're Iraqi that said, we now have 25,000 police officers in Baghdad. No, you don't. It takes years to put a police officer on the streets of Ithaca, New York, or Geneva. That person just can't give them a gun and send them out there. They gotta know the law. They gotta know how to do all that. And it takes a long time. And it takes a whole command structure. They gotta be a chief, and they gotta be a dispatcher. They gotta be a sergeant. They gotta be the whole thing. And we just we gotta appreciate the institutions that we have, and understand that there's one thing that I've learned working in 22, maybe 23 different countries. And people say, oh, we're going to have a democracy. That's wonderful. Where the hell are the polling places? Are you going to have a parliamentary system? Are you going to have a constitutional system? What's the election day? How do you raise money for it? Who's going to decide if it's close? And we got to get out of this mentality that we can just go throw a switch and have an army, throw a switch and have a police force, or throw a switch and have a democracy. It doesn't work like that. And the biggest problem in the world, and this is what we're in the middle of, how do you convince the 51 they can't kill the 49? And by the way, we ain't very good on that. We lost 600,000 people in our Civil War. When I grew up and went to school, Jim Crow was alive and well in Louisiana. So we should understand our own struggle. And we should understand that we're getting in the middle of some really, really, really sticky stuff here.
But getting back to Congress. Are we going to have a debate? Is there ever going to be a vote to say, Mr. President, you've done the wrong thing or the right thing?
I would think there would have to be. It does speak to the dysfunction in Congress. I serve on bipartisan policy.
And to be fair, the White House did not ask for a vote.
Right. But it speaks to the dysfunction of the parties in Congress. And it needs to be real work on political reform. They don't know each other. They fly in on Tuesday, leave on Thursday. Their families don't know each other. There's a lot of baked-in aspects that lead to the dysfunction. But I would suspect it would be a vote.
Mark, I love you. You're the most optimistic. You want to believe the best in everybody human being I know. That's why I'm glad my daughter's coming to school. I'm going to tell you exactly. If it goes well, you're not going to hear a word. But if it goes bad for 1 hour, then they can all be everywhere, second guessing everything. That's what's going to happen.
President Mark Garrett and James Cleveland. Not do on the radio, as you'll understand why in just a minute, but a feature of Ken's column and now his website for many years is Scuttlebutt, and Ken will explain, and I leave you all in his hands. I'm sorry.
Since I left NPR, I have my own podcast, Political Junkie, which you can find on krpoliticaljunkie.com. And I also have a website, and for years I've been doing this thing called Scuttle Button. I collect campaign buttons. I have 70,000 campaign buttons. And what I do is I put buttons in a vertical line, and it's like a rebus. If you take one word per button, you get a slogan. So we can start this, assuming, and how to turn this on? Okay, so obviously, it's we dim a light, or is that possible?
Dim the house lights if you can. Okay.
Okay, I guess that's this one.
All right.
Okay, well anyway, so if you have Huey Newton of the Black Panthers, you have Thomas Dewey, Republican for president, and Louis Lefkowitz, who went for mayor of New York, you get Huey, Dewey, and Louis.
Got it.
So that's the thing. So here you have the Speaker of the House, O'Neill from Massachusetts. You have Towaway Lindsay, my man is True Davis, African American, who ran for Senator of Missouri. D2 is David Durenberger from Minnesota. Kiss Me, I'm for Rothman from Missouri. You have Tiptoe True D2lips.
I'm afraid so.
Not doing well with this button.
There you go.
Okay, you have former Senate Majority Leader Bob Dole. You have Bob Barr, the congressman from Georgia. Robert Wagner for mayor of New York. You have you have a Barbara Jordan.
All
and
together
Ann Richard.
now?
You have Bob Barr, Bob Wagner. You have Ed Markey, the new senator from Massachusetts. You have Dew Burns, the first African-American mayor of Baltimore. And instead of a happy face, you have a frown face. You have the Marquis du Sade.
Whip it.
Okay, I don't have a button for him, but Lou Alcindor, the great basketball player from the Milwaukee Bucks. You have a Jennings for Governor Ufta, which I think is Norwegian from Minnesota. Alan Wheat ran for the Senate from Missouri. So you have Lou Alcindor, Jennings for Governor Ufta, and Alan Wheat for Senate. You have Kareem of Wheat. See, Lou Alcindor changed his name. You have the historic peace treaty in the Mideast, Menachem Begin and Anwar Sadat. You have Let Us Continue with Lyndon Johnson in '64. Al D'Amato, senator from New York. You have Begin, Lettuce, and D'Amato. Now you know why NPR needs money. You have the Pope in Poland, the first Polish Pope in visiting Poland. You have Wallace for president, and you have a Ringo Starr Stop and Smell the Roses button. You have John Paul, George, and Ringo.
They were all in the band.
The group. Okay, a button that says cows. I don't know why it says cows. It's a baseball card for Omar Moreno of the Yankees. KUH, keep Ka for district attorney. And you have a Daffy Duck button. So you have the cows, you have Omar Moreno, keep Ka, and Daffy Duck you have Moo Omar Gaddafi. Moo Omar Gaddafi. In Libya, in all the papers. You have Feinstein for vice president, you have Perot for president, and you have two buttons on the bottom line, two Supreme Court justices impeach Warren, and an anti-Robert Bork button. You have Diane Ross for the Supreme Court.
They're booing. Not booing. Booing.
Whoops. Okay, you have a great slogan, Carter Mondale 76. He spent hours working on that slogan. Mondale 76, Strom Thurmond gets the job done, obviously, because he had children when he was 90. And this was a very grotesque button, but it was from the DNC in '92. I danced on Bush's grave. I know, over the top. But anyway, Carter Mondale 76, Strom Thurmond gets the job done, and I danced on Bush's grave. You get 76 strong bones.
Tough crowd.
Go ahead, Johnny. Bill Clements, the governor of Texas, threw a rubber chicken at his opponent during a debate, so they made a button with Bill Clements' head on top of the chicken. You have Ed Koch from New York, you have the letter A on a button, and can you recognize the woman on the bottom? Margaret Thatcher.
Conservative Prime Minister.
Okay, so you have the guy dressed with the chicken, you have Ed Koch, the letter A, and Margaret Thatcher. You have chicken cacciatore. Believe it, believe it. The ninth inning, Derek Jeter's up. You have two mayors from Jersey City, and then you have a button that says overthrow the government. Coochie, coochie, coo. You have President Eisenhower, you have a Mexican restaurant in Manhattan, and you have a Turner for Congress button. You have Ike and Tina Turner. You have love for Assemblyman Vernon Jolly, ran for Congress in New Jersey, and you have Shirley Chisholm, the first African-American woman to run for president of a major party. You have love Vernon, Shirley. And that's it.